Hello, and welcome to the Miro Consulting presentation on recycling your Oracle licenses. My name is Sean Donahue, and I'm here with Elliot Arlo Colon and Wayne Federico, who will be your presenters today. If you have any questions during the broadcast, please use the question box in your control panel, and we'll answer them at the end of the session. Please note that all questions will be kept strictly confidential and are only visible to us, the presenters. Can you hear the next slide, please?
Something just failed.
Yep, it changed.
Okay, one more slide, please. There we go. Here at Miro Consulting, we specialize in software audit defense, cloud migrations, contract negotiations, license optimization, and license management for Oracle, Microsoft, IBM, and Adobe. Since 2000, Miro has helped hundreds of clients worldwide to optimize their total cost of ownership and has seen over 1.5 billion in licensing transactions. So we're going to get started on the presentation. Elliot, please start.
Yes, hello. Elliot Arlo Colon here, in case any of us sound alike. Thank you very, very much for joining today. And without further ado, we will get right into it. In terms of why have a webinar like this, well, we hear time and time again that a tremendous issue that we have, clients have, is seeing licenses appear on the annual support bills year after year after year that they are not using. So there could be a lot of events that cause the issues. It could be consolidation of environment, moving some of their environment deployment to the cloud or to cloud applications or cloud environments. To be unnecessary purchases made in the past that were used to basically lower discount by increasing the volume of the deal. There could be a discontinuing the use of a certain software platform, or it could just be downsizing of business or M&A activity that may cause certain Oracle software licenses to no longer be used or required to be used. Next slide. So we talk about challenges, right? And the challenges are that you're spending a lot of money year over year on assets that you cannot use maybe with its intended purpose. Challenges that you face include Oracle policy. Oracle, according to their policy, says you get no relief from dropping support, or you can't drop support at all, or you have no use for these licenses in the future. Or you're getting pressure internally to reduce costs, and you're seeing the big bill come every year for Oracle annual software support, and obviously that's a nice chunk of change. And so, how can you reduce the cost there? And because of Oracle's policies, you have license set conflicts, which prevent you from perhaps unbundling that purchase to try to reduce your annual support costs. Next, please. So the options, and getting right into it, from a high level, we start with repurposing, and then going to leveraging the asset value towards other purchases, and then leveraging asset value towards cloud subscriptions. From a very high level, repurposing, when we talk repurposing from high level, it's really taking an asset and essentially being able to apply that asset to create a more needed asset. So repurposing, you could use it in other ways. You can take licenses that are being used from one purpose and try to restructure it into another purpose. You also have, from leveraging assets towards necessary purchases, there's also trade-in opportunities, there's migration opportunities, there's upgrade opportunities. From very high level, there's a lot of things you can do, including taking your on-premise software assets and trading those in for cloud subscriptions. Next. Okay. Now, just to get into, before we go into questions, I want to get more specific here, because we talked about some things at a high level, a real high level, and I want to get into some specific examples that can possibly assist. Many clients come to us and say, I have licenses on my annual support bill that I no longer use, and I pay annual support for them. And at the moment, there seems to be no mechanism for getting these off our annual support bill. Tell you, there's a number of things you can do there to assist and actually reduce your spend or otherwise get more value out of the licenses that you do own and that you're paying annual support for. Keep in mind that your annual support bill shows the licenses that you own and typically are perpetual ownership. Which means there's an asset there that you've paid for at some point. Now, just like many other assets, that asset has a value, though it may not be a specific value that you can use immediately, but there are ways to trade in that asset through migration. Migration being certain licenses that you can trade for other types of license metrics, like name user to CPU, or it could be limited use to full use, or from one type of limited use to another type of limited use. There are many things you can do there to essentially reclassify your licenses and essentially get more value, or at least the value that you're seeking, out of that asset. Also, too, certain things when we talk about migration, what you're really saying is there's a choice here you have to make, where you can keep a license in its present form and repurpose it. You can migrate it to a different metric, or you can upgrade it to a totally different class of license, or sometimes even a completely different type of license. There's ways to change name user licensing to CPU-based licensing, as an example, or there in some license types and varieties, you can change application licenses to bundle products. Also, keep in mind too that when you bought your licenses, the license set that you own that you may not need today, understand that the licenses that are currently for sale in the market may be very different than the license you had way back when. So during a license review, one of the things we look at is to say, well, how did that license change? Is it still available for market sale, or did it now become bundled into something else, or maybe unbundled, and now it's the function has been split across many products? Understand that in each one of these scenarios, it opens up an opportunity for you in the repurposing of your license to extract the value that you have in your license to possibly upgrade, migrate, or repurpose into another license type. It is not uncommon for us to work on situations in which we take an application license standalone and be able to restructure that application license through a trade-in, migration, or upgrade, and bring value to that line item by changing its class into something else that is needed. And so this can happen not just on applications, but it can happen on technology, it can happen on tools, and very popular today, it can happen by trading into cloud subscriptions. Oracle, even though Oracle has changed its cloud subscription pricing and mechanisms of licensing quite a few times, and the subscription agreements quite a few times, keep in mind that the on-premise licenses that you own hold value that can be unlocked to a trade for cloud credits. Oracle has universal cloud credits. They also have a mechanism still remaining of bring your own license, where you can possibly bring on-premise licenses for deployment into a cloud deployment and environment. So so your original purpose, your original strategy for acquiring those on-premise licenses, you may be able to restructure that and actually use that value towards your new cloud subscription. So there's a lot of things that can be done there. Oracle has changed its rules a few times, but at the moment, on-premise licensing is extremely valuable when you're looking at cloud subscription agreements, as well as in repurposing towards bundle, processor, or custom type licensing. Understand too that many licenses that were purchased in the past may have some kind of limitation to those licenses. So it's important that you do a thorough contract review to determine what limitations you may or may not have on the licenses that you have and that you're paying annual support on, so that when you do trade in those licenses or migrate or upgrade or reclassify, you are aware of the limitation. You're also possibly aware of some issues or nuances within those licenses that you may want to remedy at the time. Give you an example. Let's say we had a client who had a license that was for Canadian use only, because at the time they negotiated a fabulous discount with Oracle, but that discount was predicated upon the fact that they would use these licenses only for a certain company, one of their subsidiaries in Canada only. Now they would like to buy new licenses for the rest of the world. And so they are negotiating for a purchase of new licenses. Well, I mean, one of the options is to possibly upgrade that license, reclassify it by adding the everything outside of Canada to the license right. So it's in essence, you're still capturing the asset value that you had on the original purchase. You're simply paying the gap, the difference between the original limitation discount with from the new discounted license price, and instead of having this highly restricted, limited use, Canadian use only application license, now you get worldwide usage rights. Paying pennies on the dollar by simply just paying for the gap between the highly restricted limited use license and now the full use worldwide usage license, as an example. And you can extrapolate that example in many different types of scenarios, but that's why it's very important to understand the license agreements that govern the licenses that you see on your annual support bill. Keep in mind too that you can't manage what you don't know. Very, very important to know that you do not, especially in on-premise licensing, you do not own the license. You own the right to use the software in a very specific way. So it's important for you to understand what are the rules governing that license before you do any change of that license at all or attempt to remove it from your annual support. Let's go to the questions. Okay, the first question here is, would like to learn about on-premise license and how to take it over to cloud with lesser impact to license. Well, at the moment, it's good timing for this challenge, given that you actually have a couple different options here. Oracle's new licensing strategy is that Oracle is putting together pretty favorable terms and conditions to get its on-premise clients to move to its own cloud offerings. And there's actually a bring your own license opportunity, which I mentioned earlier, which means you can actually bring your on-premise licensing to deploy in a cloud, and there's certain mechanisms around that. There's also ways where you can trade in your licensing and your annual support for certain universal cloud credits that can be used for certain cloud deployments. Keep in mind that Oracle has changed their cloud licensing or cloud agreement structure and strategy a large number of times in the last few years. So there's definitely some flexibility there, some customization there, but ultimately knowing what value an asset that you have first and the rules that are governed under it is a good starting point, as well as the amount that you paid for that original asset. So you really know what you're dealing with in terms of trade-in. It's just like if you're turning in a car, you really need to know the value of the trade, as well as the value that you're looking to achieve as the end result to determine if you're getting a really good deal. And ultimately right now, if you have on-premise licensing, especially, core EBS or or core technology products, there's definitely a large amount of options for you to try to repurpose those into a cloud deployment. Next slide. Okay, next question we received is, how do we save on test development database licenses? Okay, so keep in mind that development and test licensing, unlike most production licensing, is for use by a few development people, or in a situation of pre-production environment. So the value of that deployment is considered less than a full use production type deployment. Because of that, Oracle does offer opportunities for cost reduction on test development. You can go in by way of name user instead of processor-based licensing. Name user means you're licensing the specific number of users that have access and authority to the systems. It's also based upon a minimum name user count per CPU, but ultimately that is much, much cheaper than if you bought the same vanilla licenses that you would buy for a full-blown production environment. Also, too, there are situations where you can buy name user licenses and have those licenses limited to a specific environment. Specific environment meaning development or test or a particular application that's being developed. So there's a number of different opportunities there where you can reduce the cost significantly by buying licenses that's main purpose is development and test. Keep in mind that full use production processor-based licenses are the top end. That's the enterprise database license. That's what most companies buy and deploy when they're deploying enterprise-wide applications for database. So when you're buying the development and test, there's a number of opportunities for you to reduce that cost. Like I said earlier, and just to summarize, name users licenses can save a lot of money. Limited use licenses can save a lot of money. Specific use licenses, like specific limitations to development or test or to an application or for a time frame, are also very inexpensive. Term licensing is another option for you, where you can reduce costs by simply just paying for a year or two at a time. There's a number of different options there, but ultimately, the last thing you want to do is buy production CPU-based licensing for any type of non-production, test development environment. Also, keep in mind too, as I mentioned earlier about the repurposing. If you buy these types of licenses for development and test, you always have an opportunity down the road to then, repurpose those, restructure them into the top-end production-based processor licenses. So you're not losing value by going in this direction, short or long term. Next slide. Can you cover the benefits of OVM? Wayne, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can take that, Elliot. Okay, so basically OVM is Oracle Virtual Machine, is their example of VMware, but under Oracle. So this what can be a huge benefit to utilizing OVM is if you're in a situation where you have a lot of VMware environment that is running a lot of different things, and maybe your OVM, your Oracle, doesn't take up much of that, and you really don't want to jump through all the gyrations that Oracle will make you go through to license only what you're using in such environments. OVM can be a good option, and what it enables you to do is you can load up all your Oracle stuff on it. If it's not a huge environment, if you do it, let's say you have a very large physical machine, and you only use a portion of it, you can load up OVM on the unit, and you can pin just the processors that you're going to use with your Oracle, and those are the only processors you need to license. Now, that benefit goes away should you cluster another server in there, because then you have to count the total capacity of both servers. But it doesn't offer a good option, and it also Oracle fully supports their products running on OVM. They don't do so on VMware, although I have not heard of huge issues with people running stuff on VMware. But this is a platform that they would fully support, so that's another benefit. So for the most part, it can work out really well. It's again, it's meant to cover. It's not to replace VMware, although you could put other stuff on it. But it's really focused on just utilizing Oracle in a virtualized environment with some, depending on the configuration, capacity to limit. Whereas with VMware, it's more difficult to do that. So that's it.
Okay, and now the next question we received was, we have a rack license in the current incarnation of our database system. Rack is not being used. What can we do with that? Well, there's a couple of things I'll address here. I said, first, I guess the assumption is that the rack that you're speaking about, the real application cluster license that you're speaking about, is processor based. Because if it's a name user base, you may have some options for repurposing that into a different metric situation there. Also, not sure if it's a limited use license or not, which may open up some options there too. So those are things that would need to be identified within the original agreement. But putting that aside for a moment, if it's not being used, you would need to look carefully at the support renewals. Track back to the original procurements, find out if the rack licenses were acquired within a larger bundle, or if they were standalone. Keeping in mind too that the annual support bill that you're looking at may have gone through a consolidation or a co-termination along the way. So it may not be just one purchase that's reflected in your annual support bill, but actually may be a myriad of annual support, of mini support bills that were consolidated into one. And if that's the case, it may open up some options for you to reduce. Also, too, you mentioned the rack not being used, and before I get into any other strategy, I'd also say too, you may want to find out too, like why it was not being used. I mean, there are many customers of ours who may have come off of using real application cluster technology, but then after seeing the advancements in that functionality, then realize that they can then use it for other purposes or maybe in some scale down role. So there may be a way from a technology perspective that you may be able to utilize that technology as well. But I would say there's a number of things you can do for the rack outside of that, and that is, there is definitely some flexibility on termination. There's definitely some flexibility on upgrade and migration. And ultimately, rack is a very expensive asset in that it's probably about 2/3 or 2/3 to 3/4 the price of a database processor. So it's extremely expensive. And so you really want to, first and foremost, before you make any decision as far as termination or transfer or migration or upgrade, I would look at the original agreements that govern that rack purchase to see what was acquired at the same time. I would also see what kind of limitations were put forth within that rack agreement, because within that original contract may open up some avenues for you on repurposing or cost relief.
That's all those questions.
All right, we have a couple additional questions from the audience I want to get to. If you submitted your question and we don't get to it, we will get back to you offline after the webinar. We've had a lot of questions come in, so we're not going to be able to do all of them, but just so you know, we will get back to you. So this question is pretty good for clarification purposes. A member of the audience wants to know, when we're talking about cloud, are we specifically talking about the Oracle cloud or any public cloud, like including Amazon or Azure?
Well, when I was speaking about cloud, I was speaking about the Oracle cloud, but there are some mechanisms in place, some newly released announcements of mechanisms in place where the Oracle on-premise can be deployed in certain AWS environments as well. And maybe Wayne, you can talk a little bit more about that if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah, AWS, with the change that Oracle made at the beginning of the year and the way that you would count things, when you take your deployed licenses, ones you have on premise and you want to put them in a cloud environment, you have to, the way the calculation works, essentially, in a nutshell, it removes the core factor when applying it to an AWS or an Azure environment. So as compared to Oracle. So if you're trying to put them in either one of those environments, it's going to be essentially twice as expensive. You'll need twice as many licenses for the same amount of processing power that you're going to apply them to. And now, other situations, because a lot of people say cloud and they automatically think it's going to be Oracle Cloud, it's going to be Azure or AWS, but it could also be just an off-site, something that's not on your site, third party that is housing your stuff, kind of a colo type, and that can also run, people can consider that also from a cloud perspective. In those situations, if it's your equipment and you're going to apply licenses to that, you would apply it to that environment the same way you would do internal. So you wouldn't lose the core factoring, having the core factoring by doing that, or doubling it by putting it there. It'd be the same as if you had it internal. So there are options when you move it around, but it also depends upon what you're doing with the license. If you're running a prop hosting type of application, there's a lot to get into. That could be a webinar on its own. But if you're doing something that is home built and you're using it for your client base, that has some restrictions on what kind of cloud scenario you can put it in. Lots of times you have to run it within your own site, but there are variations that have become available. So there are different things that you can do, and we also see people who, with like the Oracle Cloud, it doesn't yet support HIPAA kind of requirements. So anybody who's got medical kind of solutions that they would go to want to put in the cloud, you can't do it yet to Oracle because they don't meet those requirements. You'd have to put it someplace else. So couple things, but there's a lot of variables that go into play, and cloud is such a generic term that is used today, and it could represent a lot of different things.
All right, thanks, Wayne. Can you advance us to our next slide? All right, while we're moving, there we go. So we don't want to run over your time limits for today. I know we have some additional questions from their audience. We will get back to you after this session in a one-on-one basis and try to help you out. For the presentation, though, that will be it. Thank you for joining us today. If you have further questions or would like a one-on-one session, please email us at sales@miroconsulting.com. Call us at 732-738-8511, extension 1208, or visit us on the web at miroconsulting.com. Again, thank you for joining us. Have a great day.